In December of 2023, the National Weather Service issued a red warning for the Yukon Territory. Temperatures dropped to -45 degrees. Most people locked their doors and prayed the power grid held. But Aurora Vance, a 28-year-old vet tech living off the grid, did the unthinkable. She opened her doors. She dragged 15 dying animals out of the snowbank and into her barn, convinced she was saving a pack of wild dogs from freezing to death. She was wrong. They weren't dogs. They weren't even normal wolves. And the massive black beast she wrapped in her grandmother's quilt wasn't a pet. That was Ragnar Thorne, the Alpha King of the Northern Alliance. And he was awake the whole time. The locals of Blackwood Ridge, a tiny unincorporated community 80 miles north of Whitehorse, usually keep to themselves. It's the kind of place where you don't ask why your neighbor is digging a hole in the backyard at midnight. You wave, you nod, and you mind your own business, like civilized hermits. But the events of December 14, 2023, became a matter of public record, largely due to the police report filed 3 days later. A police report that raised more questions than a philosophy exam written by a drunk professor. Aurora Vance had moved to Blackwood Ridge 6 months prior, inheriting a dilapidated A-frame cabin and a massive barn from her late grandmother. Aurora was running from her own ghosts, a failed engagement in Seattle, and a veterinary career that had burned her out faster than a cheap candle in a hurricane. She wanted silence. What she got was the storm of the century, and a living room that would soon smell like wet dog times 15. At 4 in the afternoon, the sun had already set, because apparently, the Yukon decided that daylight was optional in December. The wind was howling at 70 miles per hour, rattling the single-pane windows of the cabin like an angry ex demanding answers. Aurora was in the kitchen boiling water for tea, when her German shepherd, Buster, began to throw himself against the back door. Now, Buster wasn't a barker, he was a retired police dog, disciplined and stoic. The kind of dog who looked at squirrels with mild disappointment rather than excitement. But tonight, he was frantic, he was whining, clawing at the wood, his hackles raised in a way Aurora had never seen in their 3 years together. "Buster, leave it," Aurora commanded, grabbing his collar with both hands. The dog refused to move. He let out a low, guttural growl. Not at Aurora, but at something outside, something in the white void that had swallowed the world. Aurora turned on the porch light, but the blizzard consumed the beam like a hungry ghost eating hope for breakfast. All she could see was a wall of white swirling and screaming. But then she heard it. It wasn't a howl, it was a scream. A high-pitched, agonizing yelp that cut through the wind like a knife through butter. If the butter was made of ice and despair. Against every survival instinct she possessed, Aurora grabbed her heavy parka, her headlamp, and her flare gun. She leashed Buster, though he was pulling so hard he nearly dragged her off the porch like a furry freight train with a mission. They stepped into the void. The temperature was 42 degrees below zero. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in minutes. Your eyelashes become tiny icicles. Your nose hairs turn into frozen needles. It's the kind of cold that makes you question every life decision that led you to this moment. Aurora followed Buster toward the edge of the property line, where the forest met her grandmother's old hay barn. The dog stopped abruptly at a snowdrift that looked strangely uneven. The snow was stained pink, not the cheerful pink of cotton candy or summer sunsets. The ominous pink of something very wrong. Aurora fell to her knees, digging frantically with her gloved hands. She expected to find a wounded deer, perhaps a coyote. What she found was a paw the size of a dinner plate, the kind of paw that belonged to something that could eat her face for a light snack. She kept digging. As she cleared the snow, a face emerged. It was a wolf, gray and matted with blood, its eyes closed, barely breathing. But it wasn't alone. As Aurora shined her headlamp around, the horror of the scene came into focus. They were piled on top of each other, a mass of fur and blood. 15 of them. Now, wolves are apex predators. They don't pile up like scared puppies unless something catastrophic has happened. They don't huddle for warmth like college students at a football game. These animals were riddled with wounds, deep lacerations that looked like knife work, not claw marks. Someone had done this to them. They were freezing to death, their bodies going rigid. "We have to move them," Aurora whispered, though the wind tore the words away like they meant nothing. She ran to the barn, fired up the old diesel tractor, which started on the third try, proving that sometimes miracles do happen, and attached the flatbed trailer she used for hauling hay. For the next 2 hours, Aurora Vance performed a feat of adrenaline-fueled strength that shouldn't have been physically possible. She loaded 15 massive wolves onto the trailer. She dragged them by their scruffs, heaving dead weight onto the bed. She didn't think about the danger. She didn't think about the fact that if one woke up she would be shredded meat. She just saw patience that needed help. And Aurora had never been able to walk away from something that needed help. It was her greatest strength and her most expensive character flaw. The last one she moved was the one that stopped her heart. He was buried at the bottom of the pile, as if he had used his own body to shield the others. He was jet black, darker than the night around them, darker than her coffee on a Monday morning. He was colossal, easily 200 pounds of muscle and mystery. His fur was thick but matted with fresh blood oozing from a gash on his shoulder that went down to the bone. When Aurora grabbed his forelegs to drag him, his eyes snapped open. They weren't the yellow eyes of a normal wolf. They were a piercing electric amber, and there was no confusion in them. There was intelligence. The kind of intelligence that made you feel like you were the one being studied, not the other way around. He growled, a sound that vibrated through Aurora's chest bones and made her teeth rattle. "I'm trying to help you," Aurora shouted over the wind, looking directly into those amber eyes. She didn't look away. She didn't cower. "You can eat me later. Right now you're dying." The black wolf stared at her for a second longer. Something flickered in those amber depths. Surprise, maybe. Respect, possibly. Then his head lolled back. He passed out. By 9 in the evening, Aurora had all 15 wolves inside the insulated barn. She cranked the industrial heater up to 70 degrees. She ran an extension cord from the house to set up halogen work lights. She spent the night triaging, stitching wounds, setting broken bones, and administering IV fluids she had stockpiled for the local animal rescue she volunteered with. She worked like a machine, her vet tech training taking over. It was the only thing keeping her from thinking about what she was actually doing, saving 15 apex predators who could wake up and make her their midnight snack. It was around 3 in the morning, when she finally sat down, her back against a hay bale, exhausted. She looked around the barn. It looked like a war zone designed by someone who really loved fur. The black wolf, the massive one, was lying closest to the heater. Aurora had cleaned his wounds and wrapped his shoulder. As she watched him, she felt a strange sensation, a pull. It was like static electricity prickling at the back of her neck. She crawled over to him to check his vitals one last time. She placed her hand on his chest to feel his heart beat. Thump, 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 thump. It was strong, too strong, too strong. Stronger than it should have been for an animal that had been half dead 2 hours ago. As her hand rested on his fur, the black wolf's breathing changed. He inhaled deeply, sniffing her hand. He didn't growl this time. He let out a soft, low chuffing sound, almost like a purr, if purrs were made by something that could bite through bone. Aurora felt a wave of calm wash over her, a sudden alleviation of the anxiety that had plagued her for months. It was intoxicating. Alarming. Wonderful. She leaned her head back against the wall, her hand still buried in the black wolf's fur, and closed her eyes for just a second. She didn't see the black wolf open his eyes again. She didn't see him lift his head and look at the other 14 wolves who were slowly regaining consciousness. She didn't see the silent communication that passed between them, a submission, an order to stand down. Aurora Vance fell asleep, surrounded by 15 apex predators. She had no idea that by saving them she had just declared war on the most dangerous criminal organization in the Northern Hemisphere. When Aurora woke up, the barn was silent. The storm outside had broken, leaving a blindingly bright morning sun reflecting off 3 feet of fresh snow. The world looked like a postcard designed by someone with an aggressive appreciation for white. Aurora groaned, her neck stiff. She realized with a jolt that she had fallen asleep in the pen. With the wolves, the very large, very carnivorous wolves. She scrambled to her feet, heart hammering. Her first thought was that she was lucky to be alive. Her second thought was confusion. The wolves were awake, all of them, but they weren't pacing. They weren't snarling or trying to escape the barn. They were waiting. They were arranged in a semicircle around her, sitting on their haunches. It was unnervingly organized, like a board meeting, but with more teeth. The black wolf was in the center, sitting taller than the rest. His shoulder was bandaged, but he sat with a regal posture that made him look less like a wounded animal and more like a statue carved from obsidian. Okay. Aurora breathed, backing slowly toward the barn door. Good morning to you too. She noticed something impossible as she backed away. The gray wolf she had stitched up last night, the one with the deep laceration on its flank, shifted position. The bandage had fallen off. The wound was gone. Not healed. Gone. There was only a faint silvery line where the skin had been laid open hours ago. Aurora froze. That's not possible, she whispered. She looked at the others, the broken leg she had splintered on a russet-colored female. The wolf was putting weight on it. The swelling had vanished. As a woman of science, Aurora's brain tried to rationalize it. Adrenaline masking pain. I misdiagnosed the severity. But deep down, she knew. She had seen bone last night. Bone doesn't heal overnight. That's not how biology works. She reached the heavy sliding door of the barn and slipped through, latching it from the outside. She needed coffee. She needed to process. She needed someone to tell her she wasn't losing her mind. Back in the cabin, Aurora made a pot of coffee strong enough to file taxes for her, and called her contact at the Yukon Wildlife Preserve, a man named Gary. Gary. It's Aurora, hypothetically. If I found a pack of wolves severely injured, how fast could they heal? Gary's voice was crackly over the landline. Wolves are tough, but they heal like dogs. Weeks for deep tissue, months for bones. Why? Just doing some reading, she lied. Hey, have you heard anything about poachers in the area? Or maybe a dog fighting ring? Gary paused. Funny you ask. There's been chatter on the police scanner. Some private security firm from Chicago has been asking around town looking for lost assets. High-end tactical types. People are spooked. Aurora, keep your doors locked. Aurora hung up, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Lost assets. She looked out the window toward the barn. Then she grabbed a frozen roast from her chest freezer and a bag of high-protein kibble. She wasn't going to let them starve, whatever they were. When she re-entered the barn, the atmosphere had shifted. The wolves were no longer sitting in a circle. They were interacting. Two of the younger-looking wolves were playfully shoving each other near the water trough. The russet female was grooming the black wolf's ears. It looked almost domestic, like a family living room, not a wild pack. When Aurora entered, they all froze. 15 pairs of eyes locked onto her. The black wolf stood up. He walked toward her. Aurora forced herself to stand her ground. I brought food, she said, her voice shaking slightly. She dumped the kibble into a trough and tossed the raw roast onto the hay. Usually a pack would descend on the meat in a frenzy. The alpha would eat first, snapping at anyone who came close. That didn't happen. The black wolf looked at the roast, then looked at Aurora. He nudged the roast with his nose toward the russet female, the one with the healed leg. She took it gently and retreated. He's feeding the injured first. Aurora realized. That's altruism. That's not instinct. Then the black wolf did something that changed everything. Aurora had left the gate to the inner pen unlatched when she came in with the food. She was standing in the open aisle of the barn. The black wolf walked out of the pen, stepping into her personal space. He was massive. His head came up to her rib cage. Aurora held her breath, smelling wet fur, pine, and something uniquely masculine like expensive cologne mixed with wood smoke, which was ridiculous. Wolves didn't smell like cologne. He pressed his nose against her hand. He didn't sniff, he pressed. a deliberate touch. Then he looked up at her. For a moment, Aurora swore she saw frustration in those amber eyes. He looked at the door handle of the barn, then back at her. He let out a short bark. "You want out?" Aurora asked. The wolf shook his head. Aurora blinked. "Did you just?" He shook his head again. A clear no. He walked over to the workbench where Aurora had left a clipboard with her inventory notes. He nudged it with his nose until it fell to the floor. Then he placed his large paw on the paper. He looked at Aurora, then at the pen where the others were eating. He looked back at the paper. Aurora stepped closer, her curiosity overriding her fear. "You want me to look at them?" The wolf chuffed. "Yes. You're not a wolf, are you?" Aurora whispered. The reality of the situation crashing down on her like a piano dropped from a helicopter. The folklore of the Yukon, the stories the elders told about the shifted ones, suddenly they didn't seem like fairy tales. The black wolf held her gaze. The intensity was overwhelming. Suddenly, Buster, who had been locked in the house, began barking ferociously from the porch. Tires crunched on the gravel driveway. Heavy tires. Multiple vehicles. The black wolf's demeanor changed instantly. The domestic calm evaporated. He snarled, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. He spun around and herded the other wolves into the back shadows of the barn. He ran back to Aurora, grabbing the sleeve of her parka in his teeth and tugging her toward the darkest corner behind the hay bales. "Let go," Aurora hissed. He didn't let go. He dragged her down, forcing her to crouch. Outside, a voice amplified by a megaphone cut through the cold air. "Aurora Vance, this is Magnus Vane of Vane Securities. We believe you are harboring stolen property. Open the barn, or we will open it for you." Aurora's blood ran cold. She looked at the black wolf. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at her. His amber eyes pleading. He nudged her hand with his wet nose, then placed his head on her knee. Submission. He was begging her not to give them up. Aurora Vance, a woman who paid her taxes and never got a speeding ticket, made a choice. She stood up, brushed the hay off her pants, and grabbed a pitchfork. She looked down at the alpha. "Stay down," she commanded. She walked to the barn door and slid it open just enough to step out. 3 black SUVs were idling in her driveway. 5 men in tactical gear were standing by the hoods, holding assault rifles loosely at their sides. A man in a long cashmere coat stood in front. "Magnus Vane, gentlemen," Aurora said, her voice projecting clearly. "We're looking for dogs, Miss Vance." The man in the coat said smoothly, "Dangerous animals. 15 of them. We tracked their GPS chips to this structure. I haven't seen any dogs." Aurora lied, her face a mask of annoyance. "But I have seen the state troopers. I called them 5 minutes ago when I saw armed men on my property. It was a bluff, a dangerous one." Magnus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Troopers are a long way out, darling. We just want the animals. I have a contagious outbreak of distemper in this barn." Aurora improvised, her medical knowledge kicking in. "I'm quarantining sick coyotes for the state. If you go in there, you'll carry the virus back to whatever kennels you run. It's airborne." The tactical guys took a half step back. Biological threats scared tough guys more than bullets. Magnus hesitated. He sniffed the air. He frowned. "I don't smell distemper. I smell omega." Aurora frowned. "Excuse me." Magnus looked at her with newfound interest. "You don't know, do you? You have no idea what you're standing in front of." He raised a hand to signal his men to advance. Suddenly, a roar shook the very foundation of the barn. It wasn't a wolf howl. It sounded like a bear or a lion, primal and furious. From the shadows behind Aurora, the black wolf launched himself. He didn't just run. He blurred. He cleared the distance between the barn and the driveway in a single bound, landing in front of Aurora. He stood on his hind legs, and then the sound of cracking bones filled the air. Aurora screamed and covered her eyes. When she opened them 3 seconds later, the wolf was gone. Standing in his place, naked, steaming in the cold air, and covered in scars was a man. He was 6'5", built like a gladiator with jet black hair, and those same piercing amber eyes. He didn't look at Aurora. He looked at Magnus. "Hello, brother," the naked man said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Aurora's chest. "You brought my coat." The silence that followed Ragnar Thorne's transformation was heavier than the blizzard. For 10 seconds, no one moved. The steam rising from Ragnar's body created a mist around him, making him look like a wraith summoned from the earth, or a very inappropriate hallucination. Aurora stood paralyzed, the pitchfork still clutched in her white-knuckled hands, her brain misfiring as it tried to reconcile the wolf she had nursed with the naked giant standing in her driveway. Naked. Very, very naked. She forced her eyes to stay on his face. Magnus Vane broke the silence. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Ragnar. I thought the sedatives would have kept you down for at least another day. That dosage would have killed a herd of elephants." "You underestimate my metabolism," Ragnar replied. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. He took a step forward, the snow crunching under his bare feet. He didn't seem to feel the cold. "And you underestimate my patience, Magnus. Get off this land." Magnus signaled to the men behind him. The safety catches on 5 assault rifles clicked off in unison. "I don't think I will," Magnus said. "See, the council believes you're dead, frozen in the transport truck crash, tragic accident. If I leave now, I have to explain why you're still breathing. It's much cleaner to finish the job. Shoot him." Aurora moved before she thought. It was a reflex born of protecting the vulnerable. She stepped in front of Ragnar, raising the pitchfork. "No," she screamed. "Aurora, move." Ragnar roared, grabbing her waist to shove her aside. But the gunmen didn't fire. From the barn behind them a low collective growl erupted. It sounded like the earth grinding its teeth. The other 14 wolves poured out of the barn door. They didn't shift into humans. They were too weak, too injured, but they moved with synchronized lethal fluidity. They formed a phalanx around Ragnar and Aurora. The russet female stood directly in front of the lead gunman, lips pulled back to reveal teeth that could snap a femur. Magnus's men wavered. They were mercenaries paid to fight men, not a supernatural pack of monsters. "Boss?" One of the tactical guys whispered, backing up. "That's the Royal Guard. We don't have enough silver rounds for the whole guard." Magnus's face twisted in a snarl that looked uncomfortably animalistic. He looked at Ragnar, then at the pack, and finally at Aurora. His eyes narrowed.
"You!"
Magnus pointed a gloved finger at Aurora. "You're the variable, the anomaly. How did you wake them? How did you heal a magically induced coma in 12 hours? "I gave them fluids and antibiotics," Aurora stammered, her voice trembling. Magnus laughed, but this time it was angry. "Fluids? Right. You have no idea what you are, do you?" Ragnar stepped forward, shielding Aurora completely with his massive frame. "She is under my protection, Magnus. By the old laws she granted us guest right. If you spill blood on her soil, you violate the pact. The enforcers will hunt you down, not me." This seemed to strike a nerve. Magnus looked at the sky, then at his watch. The mention of the old laws and enforcers gave him pause. "This isn't over, brother," Magnus hissed. "The cold will get you eventually. Or the hunger." He snapped his fingers. "Load up." The mercenaries didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled back into the black SUVs. Magnus lingered for one last second, locking eyes with Aurora. "He's a monster, sweetheart," Magnus called out. "Don't think he's a pet. When he gets hungry enough, you're just meat." The SUVs peeled out, spraying gravel and snow, disappearing down the long driveway toward the main road. As the taillights faded, the adrenaline that was holding Ragnar upright vanished. He staggered, his knees hitting the snow hard. "Ragnar!" Aurora dropped the pitchfork and fell to her knees beside him. The other wolves crowded around, whining softly, nudging him with their snouts. Ragnar looked at Aurora, his face pale, sweat freezing on his brow. The wound on his shoulder, The one that had vanished was bleeding again. The effort of the shift had torn the freshly knit tissue. "I need," he gasped, his voice raspy. "I need clothes and protein." Then the king of the Northern Alliance collapsed face first into the snowbank. Getting a 230-pound unconscious man into a cabin is significantly harder than moving a wolf. Aurora had to use the plastic sled she used for hauling firewood. She rolled Ragnar onto it, ignoring the absurdity of the situation, and dragged him across the yard, up the porch steps, and into her living room. She managed to get him onto the rug in front of the wood stove. She covered him with blankets, stoked the fire until the room was sweltering, and then went to her bedroom closet. She pulled out a box she hadn't touched in a year. Her ex-fiancé, Mark, had been a large man, a linebacker in college. She grabbed a pair of grey sweatpants and a thick flannel shirt. When she returned to the living room, Ragnar was sitting up. He had the blanket wrapped around his waist, staring into the fire. The light danced on the sharp angles of his face. He was devastatingly handsome in a rough, dangerous way. Scars crisscrossed his chest like a map of violent encounters. "Here," Aurora said, tossing the clothes at him. She turned her back to give him privacy. "Put these on." "Thank you," he murmured. She heard the rustle of fabric. "You can turn around." When she turned, he looked almost human. Just a very large, very intense man sitting in her living room wearing her ex's flannel. But the eyes, amber and glowing, ruined the illusion. "I have questions," Aurora said, crossing her arms. She stood near the kitchen counter, keeping the island between them. "And if you lie to me, I'm calling the police." "Real police," Ragnar nodded slowly. "Fair ask. What are you?" "I am a lycanthrope, specifically of the Canis lupus variant. You know us as werewolves." Aurora felt a hysterical giggle bubbling up in her throat. She suppressed it. "And the others? My pack, my royal guard. I am Ragnar Thorn. Until 3 days ago, I was the Alpha King of the Northern Alliance, a coalition of packs spanning from Alaska to the Yukon. Until 3 days ago, my brother Magnus staged a coup," Ragnar said, his jaw tightening. "He poisoned our meat supply with wolfsbane and a paralytic agent. He loaded us onto a transport truck intended for a disposal site. He meant to dump us in a frozen lake. Make it look like an accident, but the driver hit a patch of ice near your property. The truck rolled." Aurora's mind raced. It explained the wounds, the pile-up, "and I found you." "You found us," Ragnar agreed. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Aurora, you need to understand something. That dosage of wolfsbane should have killed us, or at least kept us in a coma for a week. We were freezing to death because our bodies couldn't generate heat to heal. So how are you awake?" Ragnar stood up. He walked to the kitchen island. Aurora tensed, but he stopped on the other side. He leaned in, sniffing the air near her. "Because of you," he said softly. "Me? I'm a vet tech. I gave you fluids." "It wasn't the fluids," Ragnar said. "It was your scent, your touch." He reached out, hesitating, then placed his hand over hers on the countertop. His hand was incredibly warm. "In our world there is a hierarchy," he explained. "Alphas lead, betas enforce, but there is a third designation, extremely rare. The Omega. Omega means the bottom," Aurora argued. "The weakest." Ragnar shook his head. "That is a human misconception based on flawed studies of captive wolves, in the wild, and in our society. The Omega is the glue, the peacemaker, the healer. An Omega has the biological capacity to calm an Alpha's rage, to accelerate healing through tactile contact, to neutralize poison." He looked deep into her eyes. "Aurora, you are human, you have no wolf spirit, but biologically you carry the Omega gene. It's a recessive trait found in humans once every few generations. It's why Buster listens to you. It's why animals trust you. It's why you could walk into a barn full of apex predators and not be torn apart." Aurora pulled her hand away, stepping back. "You're saying I'm magic. I'm saying you're a biological miracle," Ragnar corrected. "When you touched me last night, your presence kick-started my healing factor. You pulled me back from the brink. You saved my entire pack just by being in the room. Aurora paced the kitchen. It was too much. So your brother Magnus, he called me a variable. He knows. He suspects, Ragnar said grimly. And that makes you the most valuable commodity in the north. An Omega who can heal a king is a weapon. If Magnus gets you, he will use you to stabilize his own power. He will force you to heal his soldiers. Aurora stopped pacing. So I'm in danger because I helped you. Yes. And you're stuck here because you're too weak to fight him yet.
Yes.
Aurora looked out the window. The sun was setting again. The barn was dark. Her quiet life in Blackwood Ridge was gone. She looked back at Ragnar. My grandmother left me this house. She told me this land was special. Maybe she knew. She looked him in the eye. If I help you get your strength back, can you promise me one thing? Anything, Ragnar vowed. You keep them away from me. Magnus, your enemies, you keep them off my land. Aurora, Ragnar said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with power. If you help me retake my throne, I will make you the Queen of the North. No one will ever touch you again. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very thin. The tension wasn't just fear anymore. It was electric. I don't want to be a queen, Aurora whispered. I just want to survive the winter. Then we have work to do, Ragnar said. Because Magnus won't come back alone next time. He'll bring the hunters. The plan was desperate. It relied entirely on a biological theory that Ragnar had never tested, and the stamina of a human woman who had been awake for 36 hours. Magnus had returned, as promised, but he hadn't come with just mercenaries this time. 3 black SUVs were surrounded by tactical vehicles. The power to the cabin had been cut. Torches flickered in the darkness like hungry eyes. Inside the darkened cabin, Aurora gripped the flare gun. On my mark, she whispered. She aimed the pistol at the large front window. Mark, she fired. The magnesium flare shattered the glass, screaming out into the yard and embedding itself in the front grille of the lead SUV. It erupted in blinding red light, causing the mercenaries outside to shout and shield their night vision goggles. Go, Ragnar roared. He kicked the back door open, snapping the deadbolt. They bolted into the blizzard. The wind was deafening, but the preft of silenced rifles was unmistakable. Snow erupted around their feet. Ragnar stayed between Aurora and the shooters, his massive body taking 2 hits that would have dropped a normal man. He just grunted, shoving her forward. They crashed into the barn door, sliding it open just wide enough to squeeze through before slamming it shut against the wind.
I need you to anchor me,
Ragnar panted, leaning against the pen gate. Blood was dripping from a new wound in his thigh. What do I do? Place your hands on my chest over my heart, and don't let go. No matter what happens, focus on the warmth, focus on healing. Give me everything you have. Aurora placed her hands on his bare chest. His skin was scalding. His heart was beating so fast it was a blur under her palms. Ragnar threw his head back and let out a sound that wasn't quite a howl. It was a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the center of the earth. It was the call of the Alpha. Aurora felt a sudden, violent pull in her gut. It felt like a hook had snagged her very soul and was dragging it out of her body. Her energy rushed out of her hands and into Ragnar. The effect was instantaneous. The air in the barn crackled with static electricity. The other 14 wolves began to convulse, not a seizure, but rapid, aggressive regeneration. The sound of bones snapping back into place echoed like gunshots. Wounds zipped shut before Aurora's eyes. Ragnar was roaring now, a conduit for raw primal power. Aurora felt her knees buckle. The room spun. Her vision tunneled. She was pouring her life force into him, and she was running empty. Ragnar, she whispered, her legs giving out. She collapsed onto the straw, her hands slipping from his chest. Darkness overtook her. The last thing Aurora heard before she passed out was the sound of 15 massive beasts simultaneously shifting into their war forms, and then the sound of the barn doors exploding outward, not from explosives, but from the sheer force of the pack charging out to meet their attackers. When consciousness returned to Aurora, it was slow and painful. Her head was pounding. She was lying on the straw, covered by a heavy wool blanket that wasn't hers. It was quiet. The wind had finally died down. She pushed herself up, groggy. The barn was empty. The massive sliding doors were hanging off their hinges, splintered. She stumbled outside into the pre-dawn light. The scene in her front yard looked like the aftermath of a medieval battle fought with modern weaponry. 3 SUVs were overturned, crushed as if giant vices had squeezed them. The snow was churned black and red. The mercenaries were gone. Only their discarded weapons lay twisted in the snow. In the center of the driveway, 2 figures remained. One was a massive black wolf, sitting on its haunches, panting heavily. Its fur was matted with blood, none of it its own. Lying in the snow before the wolf was Magnus Vane. He was alive, but barely. His cashmere coat was shredded. He was staring up at the sky, defeated. The black wolf looked at Aurora as she emerged from the barn. It didn't approach. It waited for permission. Aurora walked across the frozen battlefield. She didn't feel fear anymore. She felt a profound sense of belonging. She reached the wolf and placed a hand on its massive head. The bond snapped into place, clearer and stronger than before. "It's over," she whispered. The wolf leaned into her touch, then walked away toward the tree line to shift in privacy. Minutes later, Ragnar walked back. He was wearing tactical pants he'd scavenged from one of the SUVs, his chest bare to the cold morning air. There wasn't a scratch on him. He stopped in front of Aurora. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "You did it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You brought the North back to life. What happens now?" Aurora asked, looking at the wreckage of her property. "How do I explain this?" Ragnar looked at his brother, who was shivering in the snow, awaiting judgment. "Magnus will confess to a gas leak explosion that destroyed your barn and vehicles. His insurance company will pay for everything, plus damages for your silence. He will spend the rest of his life in a very secure facility, run by my people, contemplating the error of treason." Ragnar turned back to Aurora. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. "As for you, Aurora Vance," Ragnar said, dropping to one knee in the snow. He took her hand. "The pack is whole. The throne is secure. But the king is still missing one thing." Aurora laughed. A tired, happy sound. "You're proposing in the middle of a crime scene. You're naked from the waist up." "I'm a wolf," Ragnar grinned, his eyes sparkling. "We're practical creatures." He kissed her hand. "Come north with me, Aurora. Leave this place. Rule by my side. Be the Omega Queen that the legends speak of." Aurora looked back at her little cabin, the place where she had come to hide from the world. Then she looked at the man, the monster, the king who had crashed into her life and stolen her heart. She realized she wasn't hiding anymore. She was home. "Okay," Aurora whispered, pulling him to his feet and kissing him as the first rays of the sun hit Blackwood Ridge. "But I'm bringing the dog." The official RCMP report lists the events at the Vance property on December 17th as a catastrophic propane tank explosion that destroyed a barn and several vehicles. Magnus Vane was reportedly hospitalized for severe frostbite and mental trauma. But the locals in Blackwood Ridge tell a different story. They talk about the night the wolves howled, not just a pack but an army. They talk about the vet who disappeared overnight, leaving behind a fully paid-off mortgage and a signed deed, transferring the land to a wildlife conservancy trust. Aurora Vance didn't just save 15 animals from freezing to death. She stepped into a war she didn't know was happening right in her own backyard, and she ended it. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, one thing is undeniable: some bonds are strong enough to defy death itself. Until next time, keep your doors locked, and maybe leave an extra blanket out. You never know who or what might need saving. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as I can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.